over the last few lessons, we've actually learned a lot of different pieces that we're going to start to put together. In one of our lessons, we learned how to determine the theme. Remember, we made a list of the life issues that were talked about in the story. Then we asked ourselves, is the author giving us a message about one of these issues? We also learned that we need to test the theme to make sure that we can pull evidence from different parts of the story in order to support it, not just one tiny spot. We learned and we studied about author's craft, how an author writes a story, and the different types of craft an author can use in their story. We also had a lesson on story elements, where we talked about how the elements of the story can bring about the theme. And so today we're going to kind of put all of those together, because today we're going to start to think about making a plan for a literary essay using the same book, but now our focus is going to shift from one of the characters and what their character traits are, what type of a character are they. We're going to shift now to theme. And we're going to talk specifically, we're going to choose a theme, and we're going to create a plan to write our essay. Now, while you're working on this, I'm going to pass out a new checklist to you. And I want you to make sure, if you can look up here for just a second, notice that instead of saying character, it says theme. And so this is the checklist that we're going to use over these next group of lessons that we're going to be doing, and the next essay we're going to be writing. Now guys, I am reading your essays that you turned in. I'm almost through all of them. And one of the things that I'm noticing with many students is that you're not really using your checklist to your best advantage. I think what happens is you get so excited after you get your plan going that you just start writing, and you don't stop periodically while you're writing. Do you have all that in your book? You don't stop periodically while you're writing to look back at the checklist and make sure you've included all of the pieces. A good practice is to stop at the end of each paragraph. And that way you're right there where you can make changes and revise your work. Go ahead and open up your book to the next available page. I need to put that away before I confiscate it. Did I get a checklist to everybody? I miss anybody? Okay, so in your notebook, and if you took good notes the last time we had a lesson and we talked about the theme of Fox, these are two possible themes for the book, okay? This is my language. You could say the same thing in your own words or worded somehow differently. But if you remember our lesson, we talked about how we had this loss is difficult, and in Magpie's case, her loss was the loss of her wing, right? But we know that there are lots of things that we can experience loss of, all right? Loss is difficult to accept when it first occurs, but over time we can come to see that life is still good, okay? And then the other that we noticed the other day was that working together, friends can get you through tough times. Now, how we came to these themes, what we're gonna do is we're gonna stop and analyze. Now, we know that working together, friends can get you through tough times. We know that came through on the characters, right? The interaction of the characters, Magpie and Dog. their actions, their words. So that's how we are going to support our thesis statement for our plan, is we're going to think, how did the author develop this? Okay, and so I'm going to move on to the next part of our chart, because once you get some themes, and if you didn't get a chance to jot that all down, just leave some space and I'll put it back up in a few minutes. Now it becomes a question of asking, how did Margaret Wilde develop the theme? What did she do to make you realize that this was the message of the story? Now, we have learned that authors make deliberate choices when they're writing a story, right down to the names of the characters, the type of character they are, the setting. All of those are deliberate choices, and they're all made in order for you to get the message they're trying to relay to you. So remember, we're putting all of the pieces together today. One of our lessons was on craft, author's craft. One of our lessons was on story elements. And you have 2 charts in your green packet. One that gives a list of fictional author's craft and their definitions. One that tells you the definitions of different types of story elements. It seems like a lot to focus on, but obviously not every story is going to contain everything. So I narrowed it down a little bit to some of the things that you might want to consider when you're making your plan. If we're looking at author's craft, and craft, remember, is the way in which it's written, we can think about imagery. Now, imagery is any description that appeals to any of your senses. So what you can see, what you can smell, what you can taste, what you can feel, what you can touch. That's what imagery is. Painting a picture in your mind where you can actually experience it because the description appeals to your senses. We talked the other day about the difference between metaphor and simile. 2 different ways of comparing. For example, in our book Fox, they talk about Fox flickering like a fire through the woods, right? Through the forest. He's flickering like a fire. Then another one is repetition. We talked about this the other day. We talked about how repetition happens in our book. Notice that we have the repeating words of magpie. I will be your eye and you will be my wings. Repeated several times. Fox repeats his whispering to her several times. And we also have this big repetition at the beginning with this fire, ash, melting imagery, and then we end in the desert with the heat melting imagery. Okay? So we have those, all of those things are repeating. All of those things are repeating. And then symbolism. Now we haven't spent a lot of time on symbolism yet. We do have quite a few lessons on symbolism in our reader's workshop. But basically, symbolism is when an object represents something else. For example, our American flag represents freedom. A dove is a symbol of peace. Okay, so when a picture or an object actually represents something else or means something else. So those are some of the crafts that we might encounter in our book. Those are some of the crafts we might want to focus on to see if there's evidence of in the book, so that we could make a statement about Margaret Wilde developing the theme by using one of these. We can also talk about story elements. The way that Margaret Wilde or any author creates a story, there are certain things that have to be there. And the author's choice in what those things are impact the story in the way that the theme is developed. All right, for example, the characters. When we think about the characters that Margaret Wilde chose, all right, we can think about the fact that she chose Fawkes. And remember our conversation from an earlier lesson where we talked about how typically in traditional literature, the Fawkes character is not trustworthy. The Fawkes character is known as somebody that is sneaky and tricky and sly. Okay? Her choice of that character was important. The setting, we talked about how, since this is a Kane Miller book, that most likely the setting is the outback of Australia. The problem or conflict, right? The problem is that Magpie can't fly. And then how it's solved. It's solved because they work together. Right? Because the friends work together, the problem becomes solved. All right? Another thing to look at is the lesson learned. What did a character learn a lesson? Okay? And you could probably infer that Magpie may have learned a lesson about friendship and thinking of others instead of just herself. Okay, so let's remind ourselves what our planning sheet should look like. Now you have two choices. I'm going to slide this back down so you can see. And you can certainly reword this however you want to. As long as what you're saying is the theme can be supported with evidence, it's a valid theme. It's when you say something that you can disprove with something that happened in the story that it's not valid any longer. Okay? So consider what you would like to use for a theme, and let's start to plan. So what should this look like? Your theme statement, your thesis statement on your theme needs to include the title and the author. So what you might want to consider the theme of, and then a lot of you forgot how to punctuate a title. It gets underlined. So when you're framing your thesis, regardless of what you claim is the theme, you're going to want to make sure that you include the title and the author. Now, when it comes to the main idea sentences, remember those that list of craft and that list of story elements? That's where you're going to be drawing your main idea sentences. Because you're not going to be saying what happened, but you have to identify the character, you have to identify the story element or the author's craft. And I want you to think for a second, guys. There was a question on the pretest for the reading test that asked you what part of the story those lines were, and you were supposed to identify the story element. Well, now you've had the lessons on story elements. We've talked about story elements. You're going to use story elements in your essay, so when you get to the post-test for the reading unit, you should not have any problems at all when you have to answer that question. Just like the themes of the story, what kind of person is this character? All of these dovetail again so that you have everything you need in order to be able to be successful in mastering that standard. Okay, so let's look at a sentence frame, or a way for you to frame your main idea sentences. Okay? One way you can do it, Margaret Wilde develops the theme through the conflict. You might see a different story element, you might see a different author's craft, but the frame is going to be Margaret Wilde develops the theme, and then you're going to fill in the rest of the sentence depending on what you've identified. You're going to want it to be a complete sentence, just like you want your thesis statement to be a complete sentence, because if it's a complete sentence on the plan, it will be a complete sentence in the essay. I'm not going to write any more main idea sentences because I really need to back off on the support I'm giving you so that you can start working and grappling with this yourself. Now, we will share some when we start our writer's workshop on Friday. We will share some of the ideas that you have for main idea sentences, but it's important for you to grapple with this on your own because that's where learning takes place. So you can use what we just wrote in here as possible craft or story elements. You can use your charts that are in your green packet. Charts of, make sure you're using fiction author's craft and story element definitions. Please use your text of Fox that you have in your binder and begin to build your plan for your essay. I'm going to give you a few minutes now, and then we'll have more time on Friday to work on this and to develop our plan and to share it with our partners to make it a better plan. Okay, so go ahead and begin working. And we'll stop at about 3:10 to do our calm classroom.